So even though we're just a minute early, I thought we'd just start. One thing I was thinking about is usually with most classes, I would start with like a longer, um, quiet meditation. But actually, my view is that this Uttaratantra, the entire text is a meditation. So I don't think we need to meditate a lot preliminarily because I think what I would suggest is I take this text as the whole entire text is kind of a process of meditating, contemplative meditation. Um, but we can at least kind of come into the present moment, just feel our bodies present in the room or in our seat. Breath. And just like kind of briefly remember or bring to mind or cultivate a motivation of bodhicitta. Remembering that bodhicitta is grounded in compassion, right? And as a wish, right? Ultimately, it's a wish to completely or ultimately fulfill both our own and the purposes of ourselves and the purposes of others. Say that right, because actually they say it's to achieve the Buddhahood. We're going to get into the text what Buddhahood means actually, and what that we'll explore some of this issue of what is bodhicitta, what is refuge, and so on. But
Lauren, not to interrupt, are you going to wait till 11 before you start?
No, I'm just starting.
What about people who will plan to be here at 11?
They'll catch up. It's just a preliminary meditation, so it's okay.
Just a question.
Yeah. But in brief, the actually, right, Buddhahood. When we speak of Buddhahood, we're going to get into this in the text. But they say that the Dharmakaya, the truth body, the Buddha fulfills your purposes completely, and then the form bodies of a Buddha are for fulfilling the purposes of others. So bodhicitta is a kind of wish to achieve Buddhahood in order to ultimately achieve the welfare of oneself and of others. Actually, we could just pause and just for one moment contemplate. Like so often, our motivations is quite small. Aren't they? Like what motivates our actions are very small, little goals or little aims. You can think for like oneself, and for myself, I can think, oh, there's so many things that like seemed very motivating at one time that now seem totally meaningless. But bodhicitta, right? Like this wish to become enlightened in order to completely fulfill one's own purposes, and then to be as available and as capable as possible for fulfilling the purposes of all other sentient beings. It's the kind of intention or motivation that it's quite deep, quite profound, quite vast. So with that kind of motivation in mind, with the bodhicitta motivation in mind, we'll do the verse of refuge in bodhicitta. I'll recite it. Recite it with me if you know it. But what I want to say is, as we're reciting this, I want you to sort of contemplate, right, when we say I go about refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha. Because, if we study effectively this text, our understanding of this verse will actually become much deeper and much more profound. This is a text that really explores in a pretty, quite unique way, the meaning of refuge, actually. So, in a way that's quite profound. So, sort of notice as we go over this verse of refuge and bodhicitta, notice your current understanding of the meaning of the verse. And then, as we go through the text, see for yourself if Maitreya's teaching on this, the Uttaratantra, helps deepen and shift your understanding of refuge. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Through the merits of giving and the other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. Yeah, and then you'll see this text really, I mean, it's a long chapter, but as we go through it, it covers a lot that's related to that one verse. So, that verse can be like a gateway into many meanings that are explained in this text.
Text URL or anything for the text? Or?
Actually, there's a hard copies on the back table there if you want one. Yeah, there's a chart. There are charts, and Jan sent out PDFs of the text to everybody who's registered. If you didn't get one, you can email her, and she can send you a PDF of it. Was it same text? Yeah, same text. We have some hard copies here that were made printed, got printed. But so we have some hard copies here, but also you can get a PDF, and folks online, if you don't have the PDF, if you email Jan, she can send it to you. And so what we'll be studying in this series of classes is particularly mainly the first chapter of the Uttaratantra Shastra, right? Or the Shastra is like, we'll get into the meaning of that word, but so I'll just say that the Uttaratantra Shastra, we'll translate it in a second. And it's by, it's said to have been composed by Maitreya. And so I can't see, this is a statue actually of Maitreya. We have a statue at the center of Maitreya. And Maitreya is said to be abiding in, actually they say that when, according to the Mahayana, well, actually, according to all Buddhist traditions, Maitreya, there'll be 1,000 Buddhas in this eon. That's the idea on this, who comes to this earth. And so, Buddhists, I just want to say that too, as American people, it's funny. I think this often. We think in like, I was raised to think in fairly short terms. Like, I don't think anybody ever mentioned an eon to me, particularly. But Buddhists in general think in very long terms, like in terms of temporally. If you read Buddhist texts, they think in vast periods of time. That's one point. Right? Like they say, to become a Buddha usually takes 3 countless great eons, which are much longer than an eon. But in this eon, they say Shakyamuni Buddha was the 4th of 1,000 Buddhas who will come to this planet over the course of a vast period of time. And they say before he came to this planet, he was dwelling in a kind of paradise called Tushita, which is Ganden in Tibet, which is the name of the monastery. Lama Tsongkhapa's monastery was named after that. He's founded a monastery and named it after that, Ganden. In Sanskrit, it's Tushita. So anyway, Shakyamuni Buddha was said to have been kind of dwelling as a 10th bhumi, 10th ground bodhisattva in the Tushita paradise when he looked at the planet and said, now they're ready. It's time to take rebirth in the womb of a mother and become a Buddha on this planet. And before he left Tushita paradise, he turned to his foremost disciple, who was Maitreya. And he said, now it's your turn to teach here. I'm going to the earth to become fully enlightened Buddha. And when the time is right, you'll be the next Buddha to come to the earth. And so Maitreya is said to be also the next Buddha who will come to this planet after some great length of time. And so now he's said to be dwelling in Tushita paradise, and they say he'll be the next Buddha to come here to teach Buddhism after the teachings of Shakyamuni Buddha die out, which Shakyamuni Buddha said will happen because everything's imperfect. I'll say just a brief personal, like I've had a long interest in and love of this text actually. When I like 1990 or 91, when I was at Kopan Monastery, Kirti Sencha Rinpoche taught just a little bit of it, or how to take refuge. He taught about how to take refuge from this chapter. I think I'd heard about the text from Jan Willis before that, but that was the first time I really studied part of it. I became very intrigued. So then I requested Geshe Silga from Sarah J Monastery. He came to the center many years ago and taught a brief overview of this text. And then Gyume Kensho Rinpoche taught this chapter in great detail in New York City. So I went there and heard that. And then he taught it again online. So I heard it again. So I've had a long love of this text and wish to study it. And I think my understanding of it's a little better than, well, certainly it's better than it was. I can say that. I think there are some parts which we'll get into that are hard to understand still and are supposed to be hard to understand. So I'm not sure, I'll do my best. But I'm getting at this, I'm mentioning that partly because I'm going to tell a story now that actually that Gyume Kensho Rinpoche told at the beginning of his teaching. So I thought I'll follow that tradition. But I think this story gets at a number of points, which is kind of the origin story of this text. So the story is that, actually I'll start with this. There was in India in the 300s, there was a yogini, a woman who was a great practitioner of Buddhism. And again, I'm getting at this, you'll see this part about rebirth and about vast periods of time, but she was looking around India and she thought, Buddhism is flourishing here, but the teachings could flourish more. And she had some kind of insight that if she were to have children, her children would be great Buddhist teachers. She knew this. She was some kind of, so she had two sons. One was Asanga, and the other was Vasubandhu, who are two of the greatest Buddhist authors in history. So this story is about Asanga, the elder of her two sons. And so Asanga studied Buddhism for many years and was a great scholar, quite a good scholar, but he wasn't satisfied with his understanding. He felt there was more to understand. And in particular, in terms of the Mahayana Sutras, if you study them, they're very profound, but they're difficult to understand. He thought, the current scholarship and the current texts are quite good, but there's something more to be understood. So he decided he was going to go off and do a retreat on Maitreya. Because he said, well, Maitreya is, 10th level bodhisattva, and he would understand the teachings of the Buddha better than anyone here. So let me meditate on him. So he went to a kind of cave in the mountains, and he started meditating on Maitreya. And by the way, Maitri in Sanskrit is love. Right? So Maitreya means the loving one. So Maitreya's very name is love, essentially, which is quite beautiful, isn't it? His nature is love. It's what he embodies. It's his practice. It was his main practice on the path, I suppose. So anyway, Asanga began meditating on Maitreya. And he meditated, and it's been interesting. Some people sometimes do 3-year retreats. So he did, he started, and he spent 3 years in a cave meditating on Maitreya. And at the end of 3 years, he hadn't had a vision of Maitreya, not much. He felt not much had happened. So he became discouraged. Thought, wow, I've been here 3 years and nothing's happening. And can you relate at all? So he thought, well, maybe this isn't for me. Maybe I should leave. So he got up and he left the cave. And there are different orders of these three. There's going to be first three signs. Different texts have different orders of them, but I'll do the order I saw. So he left the retreat, and as he was walking down the mountain a little ways, he saw a deep, what's the word? A ravine, I guess you could say, or a hole in the mountain, right? And he thought, oh, where'd that come from? And you could see there was just dripping water from a spring, right? And water was dripping, but slowly it had created a whole ravine, right? If you've been to the Grand Canyon, you know about this. And he stopped and he looked at that ravine, and he thought, if something as tiny and as soft as droplets of water can make a ravine this big, then I shouldn't give up. My efforts may also lead to something big. And so he hiked back up, and he went back to his cave. And he meditated for 3 more years. Now he's 6 years in, right? He thought, okay, now it's 6 years. Not much is happening. I still haven't had a vision of Maitreya. I thought I'd have some kind of visionary experience. No vision. I don't see a huge, I wanted to change, help Dharma flourish. Nothing's really happening. And he thought, 3 years is 6 years now is a long time, right? So he thought, all right, I guess I should leave again, just stop. So he left. And I mean, again, I may be getting the order of these, there are different orders, but he left. This might be a different order, but anyway, then he saw, I'll just tell it this way. Then he saw, he was walking again down the mountain, and he saw like a groove in the solid stone, like a groove, and he stopped to look, and he said, wow, how did that, there's like a, this is like a stone, you could, if you're hiking in the mountains, sometimes, right, there's a stone wall, and then there's like a groove where it goes in and then out and continues down. And he looked and he saw there was a nest there. And then he watched, and the parent bird would fly in, and its feathers would touch the stone as it landed in its nest to feed its babies. And he stared at that for a long time. And he thought, something as soft and gentle as a feather can cut stone. And he thought, like, I'm going to add words here for a second, right? Because I'm projecting now for a second. But my mind is like a stone, right? Is the implication here. And it's hard to change. But I shouldn't give up. I should keep trying. The mind can change. It just takes consistency over time, effort over time. And even a feather can cut stone. My effort can change my mind. So he went back. And he spent another 3 years. And you can guess what happened next, right? So now he's 9 years in. And still not much. No vision, not much has happened. So can you imagine that? 9 years living in a remote, kind of cave, right? Trying to make effort, but also related to oneself. Right? Are there times where you kind of feel like you're making effort and it's not bringing the results? Well, Asanga was a great being who had practiced over many lifetimes, and he spent 9 years at this point in retreat. So you can feel, okay, I'm not alone, or shouldn't get too discouraged. Asanga had to go through a lot of effort. And this time the story says this is the ninth year. This one is always comes third. The other two sometimes get reversed on different texts, but this one always comes third. So he's going down the mountain again. He thinks, oh, this isn't working. He's going down the mountain, and he sees a very old man, and he sees the old man is holding like a piece of metal and rubbing it with cotton. And then on the side, the old man has a pile of needles. And Asanga says, hey, old man, what are you doing? And the guy says, well, I've got this ore, and I'm making needles. I rub the ore with cotton to wear it down into a needle. And he says, imagine, right? He looks at him and he thinks, like, it's not the most effective way to change the shape of metal using cotton. It's quite soft. But he has a pile of needles there. And again, Asanga feels, oh, this is some kind of sign, right? I should go back. Don't give up. And each time, do you hear the implication? Each time it's something soft, changing something hard, right? Do you notice that? So think about what's the meaning of that, right? Notice there are a few things about his story, I think, that are very deep to contemplate. And I'm telling it partly because Rinpoche told it this time, partly because it's related to the text, but it's also related to our mind, right? How do you change your mind, right? And which is what Asanga was trying to do. He was trying to work with his mind, retreat. It's a story about perseverance. It's a story about how you work with your mind. So anyway, he went back to retreat again, and he spent 3 more years. Right. So at this point now he's 12 years into retreat. And at the end of 12 years, Asanga thinks, okay, still no vision of Maitreya. This is kind of ridiculous now. I'm putting words in his mouth. I said ridiculous. But he was recognizing it was kind of a long time. And so he thought, okay, retreat again. And I want you to think about something as we tell the next part of the story, like, did the retreat work? I'm going to ask you that question as we get to the next part of the story. So he's walking down the mountain this time, and he sees a dog laying by the side of the path, deeply, with a deeply wounded dog, right? And the wound is festering and has maggots in it. And he sees this, the dog is kind of, suffering terribly, has maggots in its side, and he gets overwhelmed with love and compassion for the dog. And he thinks, I have to save this dog, I have to do something. So he goes and gets a stick, as one might, and he starts thinking, well, let me clear the maggots out, and then I'll sort of take the dog and go look for somebody who can help. And as soon as he even taps the dog with the stick, the dog like yelps loudly, of course, because it's in pain, right? And so that's not going to work. And also, I'm harming the maggots. I don't want to. The maggots, they're also sentient beings. I think it's Buddhist, so he doesn't want to harm maggots either. So he's thinking, what can I do? And so then he decides, I need something soft, not something hard like a stick, right? So he thinks, well, I'll use my tongue to lift the maggots out of the festering wounds. Imagine that for a moment, right? Like that's it's actually it's something a mother might do for her child, isn't it? Many mothers would do that for their, like it's the kind of thing a mother would do for a child. He had that kind of love for and compassion for the dog and for the maggots, right? So he gets down on his, he kneels down and he thinks, all right, I'm going to lift the maggots one by one with my tongue, get them out of the wound, and then I'll bring the dog and go look for a veterinarian, I guess. You probably call it that in India, but equivalent. So his face, is going down towards the dog, and his tongue's out, and eventually his tongue hits dirt, and he's like, he missed, he missed, and he looks up, and they say he sees Maitreya in a body of light floating in space in front of him. And this part I find funny. I think it's quite funny. Buddhist stories of vision, Buddhist visionary stories aren't like Charlton Heston. They're not like that from the movie, whatever. It's like the Ten Commandments or something. But so his face is, now you can imagine him, right? You can imagine, first of all, he spent 12 years in a retreat. It's probably kind of grimy, right? Now his face has just hit the dirt. He looks up and he sees Maitreya, golden in color, radiating light in space, and he says, where have you been? It's been 12 years. Come on. And Maitreya says, I've been there the whole time. You couldn't see me. You weren't pure enough. Your karma was such that you weren't able to see me. And Asanga doesn't quite believe him. He says, yeah, sure. 12 years is a long time. How am I supposed to know you were there? You can see like they're having a kind of back and forth, right? And Maitreya says, it was your act of love for that dog that purified you enough so that you could finally see me. And Tibetan lamas often pause and tell that at that point in the story and say, it's compassion, right? It's bodhicitta, it's love that purifies your karma. Right? That's and go back to the metaphor for a second. They don't say this part, but I'm going to say it. Like the soft water. Water is a symbol of compassion in Buddhist metaphors sometimes. And also the soft wing, also the cotton. Right? How do you change your mind with something soft? With love, right? Is part of the implication, I think. I think that's my own interpretation, that last part, the softness. The lamas don't say that. I'm adding that part. The rest is how it's usually told. I try to be precise about it because I'm not trying to change it in the tradition, but actually, so then this is funny too. So he still doesn't believe Maitreya. It's kind of funny, right? Can you imagine you're having a vision of Maitreya Buddha or Maitreya, the 10th Bodhisattva, radiating golden light? He's still feeling kind of like 12 years, like, you can imagine. And so Maitreya says, I'll prove it to you. Put me on, I'll rest on your shoulders and walk through town and see if anyone sees me. And so he says, okay. So Maitreya is kind of resting on his shoulders, and he walks through this town, and most people see nothing, right? And then they say, I think it was one old woman saw the dog on his shoulders, and then or one person, no, it may have been one person, and then one old woman saw a foot, because Maitreya is just his foot. And the idea there is getting at the purity of your karma, right? that you have to be, somebody had to have very pure karma to see Maitreya as a dog. And then somebody else had to have extremely pure karma to just see Maitreya's foot. Asanga was now able to see Maitreya completely. I'm pausing just to say, I think I've often come back to this story when I'm, to be honest, I'm practicing and I'm feeling like, oh gosh, this is hard. I come back to that story sometimes, and I'm pausing to share that because it can be useful to share, to think of a Sangha and to think of what works, not just to be, one part is, okay, we'll keep persevering, right? But there's another part, which is what actually works, right? To change your mind, and that story is getting at what works. It's love, right? It's compassion. It's also getting at something else, right? Which is it's mysterious, isn't it, too? Why that day? It's also getting at, also one other point I want to make, just my own reflection about Asanga's story, that Asanga paid attention, didn't he? First he stopped for the dog. If he hadn't went to work, we wouldn't be studying this text if he hadn't stopped to help that dog. He also stopped to look when he saw the groove in the rock. He stopped to look at the ravine, right? He noticed what was present around him and took teachings from his own experience, right, in nature, in this case, in art, right? And again, I think there's a lesson there, is what I'm saying. So anyway, then he said to Maitreya, well, you know this because you were there the whole time, but the reason why I was doing the retreat is I want to help beings, and I feel that the Dharma is not totally clear as it's currently being taught in India here, which was the main place of Buddhism, of course, at that time. And so Maitreya said, I'll take you to Tushita, paradise, for a while, and I'll teach you. And then you can come back and share those teachings, essentially, with others. And so he kind of, I think, held on to, I don't know if it was Maitreya's robe or his foot. I think it was his robe, but it may have been his foot. And he took him to Tushita, Pure Land, and he studied what are called the 5 treatises of Maitreya. So there are 5 texts that Maitreya taught to him. And these texts are still existent in Tibetan. Some of them are existent in Sanskrit. I don't think all of them are still, but some they're still Sanskrit. It was in Sanskrit originally. He was Indian, so it was a Sanskrit text initially. But they're all existent in Tibetan, and they've all been translated into English now. All of them exist in English. And then so he stayed there and studied those 5 treatises, and then came back to India and wrote them down, shared them with others, and wrote commentaries to some of them, and then wrote also his own compositions based on them. And one of his commentaries was to the Uttaratantra. He wrote a text called, I think it was called it's the Ratno Vibhaga, I think is how you say it, but he wrote his own commentary to Maitreya's text to explain it. And we'll be basing this commentary partly on his commentary and partly on one by various commentaries, actually. The main ones will be Asanga's own commentary, because his is quite reliable, obviously. And then Lama Tsongkhapa's, one of his 2 closest disciples was Gyaltsab Je. He also wrote a commentary to this text, so we'll be basing our exploration mainly on the teachings of Asanga and of Gyaltsab Je, but I'll supplement it by some other commentaries also that have been written that kind of clarify certain points. So that's that. And then one other point is the 5 treatises of Maitreya. This is sort of interesting, I think, so I'll just share it. Is 3 of them teach, if you know Buddhist philosophy, Asanga became famous as they call him the trailblazer or the door opener of the Yogacara, or Yogacara, or sometimes Chittamatra school of philosophy, which is like, sometimes we say Chittamatra means mind open, sort of consciousness only, which is different than the Madhyamaka school, which was the trailblazer, was Nagarjuna. So those are the 2 sort of main Mahayana traditions of philosophy, and each of those masters kind of opened the door. Tibetan Buddhists usually consider Madhyamaka to be the higher of the 2 philosophical schools, but consider the Yogacara to be quite profound and to teach some very profound things that are emphasized, and also to be an appropriate and very helpful philosophy. Anyway, 3 of Maitreya's 5 treatises are said to take a Yogacara perspective, and 2 are said to take a Madhyamaka perspective. So Asanga taught both, actually, and Maitreya taught both. And the 2 that teach a Madhyamaka perspective are the Uttaratantra, which we're studying, and also the Abhisamaya Alamkara, which is the ornament for clear realizations, which is one of the main topics studied by people who are becoming geshes. The geshes, that's one of the 5. They study certain treatises, and that's one that they spend a lot of time on. They also study Tantra, supplements to that. The others of the 5 treatises are the Mahayana Sutra Alamkara, which is like the ornaments of the Mahayana Sutras. And then there are 2 others that are called treatises that distinguish, or Vibhaga treatises. One distinguishes between the Dharma and the Dharmata, so between things and reality, you could say, between things and the ultimate nature of things. The other one is distinguished between the middle and the extremes. So those are his 5 treatises. But all right, so that's kind of an introduction to where the text came from. So we kind of, and then and it came down to us, interestingly, like they say, it came down on an actual lineage, right? It continued on from that time. So Maitreya heard it, taught it to Asanga taught it to, I think, Vasubandhu, then it came down through Atisha all the way to like the current Dalai Lama, Tensor Rinpoche, these various lamas who hold this lineage now, which is kind of touching, I think, sometimes. So I think, wow, like, it's an actual unbroken kind of tradition passed down through these generations to today. And then next, it's a long introduction, but next I want to just talk about what's the title, right? So Uttaratantra Shastra is the Sanskrit title, which is usually translated as like the Shastra, you could say the treatise on the Sublime Continuum. If we say Mahayana Uttaratantra, so sometimes we say Mahayana Uttaratantra Shastra. So that would be the treatise, Shastra's treatise on the Sublime Continuum of the Mahayana. Actually, that's the way our translation says, doesn't say the word treatise, but it should. So treatise on the Sublime Continuum of the Mahayana. And Mahayana, right? Mahayana is great vehicle. You often say we're Mahayana. Sometimes you might say, I'm a Mahayana Buddhist, right? You might say that. We're going to explore what does that mean. Actually, that's what part of what we're going to study now is like, what does it mean to say I took refuge? What does it mean to say I'm Mahayana? Well, even the word Mahayana. So what is the meaning of the title? Right? And so, if we just say the words, right? So we'll go into the meaning of the words, actually. So I'm going to start with Mahayana because I mentioned it earlier, right? So and how has everybody heard that phrase, right? Mahayana. I heard that before, I assume. Right, and usually we say great. Maha is great, and Yana is vehicle. Right? So what does it mean to say great? Why is it great? What's so great about it? What's so great about the Mahayana? And so in our text, actually, in these texts, in the commentaries by Asanga and by Gyaltsabje, it was interesting. They say there are 7 greatnesses, but when my teacher Kensur Rinpoche taught it, he said he taught 8 actually. So I'll present it as 8 because that's the way Kensur Rinpoche taught it. And he said 6 greatnesses refer to the path, and 2 of the 8 refer to the result. So we're exploring what is Mahayana. It's interesting, isn't it? For many years, you could hear the phrase Mahayana, but just the phrase Maha, what does it mean, right? So what's great about it? There's an answer. First is, so these are the 8 greatnesses. One is the object to be studied are great, which means that the sutras, the scriptures of the Mahayana are vast. Actually, if you study the Mahayana sutras and the commentaries, the shastras, there are many, but that they're humongous and they're extensive. Actually, I remember once I tried to read, I had read that Lama Tsongkhapa read the Avatamsaka Sutra. It's translated in English. I have 3 volumes. It's like huge. And they say he was reading it when he realized emptiness. And I thought, oh, I'll read it. It's in English. And I thought, I'll read it. And I started reading it. I was like, I got like maybe a third of the way through the first volume. And I thought, I can't do it. I was like, I'm not up to, like, I'm not capable of reading this. It's too, and I thought of my grandfather used to make a joke. He used to say, my grandmother was a good cook, so she would cook something wonderful. He would, I don't know if you can handle this. But he used to say, I'm not sure if you can handle this. It's so good. You may not be able to, like, I don't know. Go slowly, he would sort of joke me. He's going, go slowly. I'm not sure if you use the food this good. But it felt like that trying to read this. I was like, wow, I realized when I was reading it, I never understood it before I started reading that scripture. And I started going, oh, I come from a culture that doesn't have anything like this. Like, from Aristotle on, all of our stories are conflict. Right? Aristotle said a story should be driven by conflict. Right? If you read Shakespeare, they always have every story, right? From Shakespeare all to today's movies, they always have a conflict, right? There's a problem. And then either the problem ends up in a tragic way, or maybe it turns out okay. And if something's good, I always say this, because this is what I realized when I was reading that scripture, is like, if things are in an inspiring story, actually, usually there's a bunch of misery and conflict, and then there's a moment or two where somebody does something positive, and you think, you cry maybe, or you think, oh, that's wonderful, something good happened. And in the Avatamsaka Sutra, right, the flower ornament scripture, it's like it's these stories of bodhisattvas where they're like blissed out, giving their eyeballs throughout 17 million universes, and they feel blissed that they can give their eyeballs to beings who are blind, and then they go and they give their bodies to feed, like whatever beings, and then they're like flying across universes, just doing these beautiful acts, like creating places where beings can become enlightened, and creating contexts to enlighten hundreds of thousands of beings over the course of a few years, and they go somewhere else. And I was like, oh, I just can't take it. It's too positive. I'm not like, so that's why I thought my grandfather. I'm like, oh, I don't have a digestive system that can handle the richness of this. And so I hope to get back to it and finish reading it. Give up. But so the first, I'm just getting at the first of the first of the greatnesses of 8, is that the scriptures are vast in what they teach, in their length, in the scope of what they're explaining, in the sort of amazing, compassionate vision that they're teaching. That's one of the 8 greatnesses. I'll pause. John, you have a question? John, you.
I was just curious, that's helpful to point out that 5 of the treatises of Maitreya, that 3 of them are Chittamatra and the other 2 are Madhyamika. So has anybody ever also pointed out whether those Madhyamika texts are Prasangika or Spatantrika? Did they make that kind of distinction as well?
Yeah, the Abhisamayalankara, the Ornament for Clear Realizations, is said to be Svatantrika, Madhyamika, and I think Kent Rinpoche, if I remember right, said that the Uttaratantra can be interpreted. Actually, I think he said the Uttaratantra can actually be interpreted as either according to Prasangika or Svatantrika. I think is what he said, if I remember right. That you could read it either way, I think. But
Okay.
the Abhisamayalankara for sure is Svatantrika Madhyamika. That's perspective.
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, it's one thing as I dig into these texts is that it just gets sometimes overwhelmingly confusing, especially when they begin to talk about yogacara. But it's also helpful to just keep plugging away at it, and that's part of the inspiration I take from a Sangha in his 12 years is you just have to keep working at it, until it starts to clarify. But so thank you for that.
Oh, sure. Okay, so then the second of the 8 greatnesses is that Mahayana, this one may be what people have heard before, is that the Mahayana is said to be great because you're not only pursuing your own aims, you're pursuing the aims of all sentient beings. So it's a great number of sentient beings whose welfare you're working towards. The third greatness is greatness of knowledge, because one way they say it is, Kinshasa said the transcendental wisdom knowledge isn't just emptiness of self, but the emptiness of all phenomena. So the point here is that in this context, there's some sometimes they say that on the vehicle of individual liberation, you mainly have to realize the emptiness of just your own sense of self. Whereas in the Mahayana, they say the Mahayana practitioners use vast reasoning, many different kinds of reasoning, to deeply and completely realize the selflessness of all phenomena. So it's vast in that sense, the emptiness of all phenomena. Then the fourth is great effort, because a bodhisattva, somebody who practices the Mahayana, makes great effort over 3 countless great eons, and their effort is joyful, and it's perfection of joyous effort, right? So they have a kind of continuous and joyful effort that they make over a vast period of time in order to accomplish the welfare, to accomplish Buddhahood, in order to accomplish the welfare of all sentient beings. So it's great in that sense. Then there's great skillful means, which means that bodhisattvas, this is an interesting way to say it, and we're going to explore this more in this text, what it means, but that bodhisattvas don't abandon some others in samsara, and that while they're not, they cease to be samsaric beings themselves, they still abide within samsara in order to benefit the welfare, to bring about the benefit of others. At first, actually, they are samsaric beings, but once they're Arya bodhisattvas, they're no longer samsaric beings, but they abide within samsara to accomplish the welfare of others. And in this text, we'll explain more what that means, which I never understood until I studied this text, actually. But so that's a great skillful means, is that that they don't get tainted by the mental afflictions themselves as they help others abandon their mental afflictions, is another way of saying that's their skillful means. Right, so they can abide with those who are angry and try to help them learn patience, and they don't become angry themselves. They can abide with those who are overwhelmed by desire and help them decrease their craving without getting overwhelmed by desire themselves, and so on. Then next is that the path is great, or their vehicle is great, which means that they cultivate, there are 5 paths you traverse: the path of accumulation, the path of preparation, the path of seeing, and the path of meditation, which leads to the path of no more learning, which is Buddhahood itself. And so that they traverse this kind of great path, these great paths of progress, gradual progress through stages to achieve Buddhahood. So those are the 6 that are cause. And then there are 2 that are results, 2 greatnesses that are results. One is the attainment is great because it's Buddhahood, right? It's a kind of unsurpassed. And what that means in a sense is that there's no higher attainment than that, right? It's the greatest thing, according to Buddhism. We'll study what this means, and then you can debate it if you want to, but Buddhism is asserting they achieve the greatest possible result. And Buddhism lists many different results you can achieve. Like you could become you could achieve your own nirvana, right? As a, you could just achieve a good rebirth. You could actually, there are many, right? You could achieve just a good rebirth. You could achieve rebirth as a divine being in a divine realm. You could become a god or something. You could become a demigod. You could become a ruler of 1,000, world systems with the divine body. Or you could achieve your own liberation as a hearer, right? Or you could achieve your own liberation as a Prajeka Buddha, they call it, right? Prajeka Buddha is like a solitary Buddha who doesn't teach verbally, but none of those are as high as a Buddha. So they're saying Buddha is the greatest of all, anything that one can achieve, because in Buddhahood, one has overcome even the most subtle of one's inner obstacles, and one has achieved the utter, infinite, limitless wisdom, love, compassion, skill, all the positive qualities have been developed to the fullest possible extent, and all negative traits and imprints of them have been completely eliminated. So there is no more exalted or great achievement. So it's the greatest attainment. And the last is that the enlightened activities of the Buddha are great, in the sense that they're limitless to benefit sentient beings, and they go on until the end of samsara. So the activities of a Buddha are also great. So that's interesting, isn't it? So I'm just going to pause now. So we're studying, right? It says the title of the text, if you look at it in the text that we give out, is Mahayana Uttaratantra Shastra. So those 8 are explained in this context, the meaning of just Maha. It's funny. Then we have Yana, right? And Yana we translate usually as vehicle, right? So in this context, one point is a vehicle is that which lifts you higher and higher, or takes you somewhere, right? Takes you somewhere you want to go. And in this context, they say Yana can refer to the path you travel, right, to Buddhahood, and it can also refer to the result itself. So when they say Mahayana, they're saying it's the great vehicle in the sense of the great path or the great way that you go through to achieve Buddhahood, and it can also imply Buddhahood itself, which is where you're going. Right. So that's the Mahayana. Then Uttara, right? Uttara means unsurpassed or sublime, right? You could say, like they translate here as sublime or exalted or unsurpassed. And so the implication there, right, is that what this text is going to cover is an unsurpassed topic, right? It also implies something else, though, because the Sublime Continuum, right? We're going to get into what's the Continuum, Tantra, in a second. But I think for meditation, because I said this whole text is like a meditation, I think it is. I hope you're starting to see that too from your experience. But the continuum is within you. We're going to get to what it means. The continuum of Buddha nature, use that term, Tathagata, is inside of you, right? And that's unsurpassed. It's the unsurpassed. Actually, you could say it this way too. You know, that continuum within you is what's unsurpassed and sublime, most sublime in you. Does that make sense? It's the most important thing. You could say it this way too. It doesn't say this in the commentaries, but I'm just adding it to sort of for emphasis. It's what's sublime in the sense it's the most important thing about you. It's the thing that would be most worth focusing on about yourself. You know, and oftentimes we focus on other aspects of who we are, right? Like, does my hair look okay? Or, how's my whatever, or my eyes look good, or whatever it might be, right? Or how's my something? And what this is saying is like, what matters about you is your Uttaratantra. Because this Uttaratantra is not, you get a point here, we're going to get into what Tantra means in this context, but that this continuum inside of you is what would be most wise for you to focus on. Does that make sense? So this treatise is not about, I think it's an important point here when you think about Uttaratantra. This treatise is about you. Does that make sense? Like that's what it's saying. It's a treatise about a sublime continuum inside of you that you may not be aware of. And the treatise is trying to point it out to you. And there are metaphors that will come later that are getting at this point that if somebody doesn't point it out to you, you may never notice it. And yet it's the most important thing about you. And so Uttara has a deep meaning, right? Sublime or exalted or wonderful, or I don't know. It's something about you that's remarkable, that's worth paying attention to. And then Tantra, right? And that's the next phrase, right? Mahayana Uttara Tantra. So Tantra is translated here as continuum, right? Or sometimes it's like sometimes in translators will say from Sanskrit, will say it's like a thread, a continuum like a thread. They'll sometimes translate like a thread. In ancient Sanskrit, I think there was an etymological connection there. So it's like a continuum that, we sometimes say that, like the thread that connects things or something. So in this context, what does that mean? Right? The continuum. And I actually want to share, I'm just pausing, but yeah, maybe I'll just go into this a little bit. Like, let's skip it, but it's worth noting. So Tantra, most of you know this, right? There's a phrase Tantra, which is like sometimes the word Tantra can refer to like a vehicle, right? The tantric vehicle, or the Vajrayana secret vehicle, secret mantra. Asanga and Gyaltsabje don't say that's not the referent here. it's not referring to, this is a Sutrayana teaching, it's not a tantric teaching. So they say this is not a teaching on Tantra. Tantra doesn't mean that in this context, it has a different meaning. But there are other Tibetan authors who kind of took it Tantra to imply that the Uttaratantra can be like a bridge between Sutra and Tantra, that it has certain implications for Tantra. And I'll get into that in a second, but say is like what Khenso Rinpoche, my teacher, said when he was teaching on this was he said, you know, technically this isn't a teaching on Tantra, but it's analogous to Tantra. And that if you understand this teaching, it'll help you understand Tantra. And so if you want to take it as kind of having implications like that, that's okay. You know, he was kind of saying these Tibetan teachers who have said that it's not the actual, it's not taught in that way. In other words, that's not, when Maitreya taught it, he wasn't teaching on Tantra. But there are similarities, and so it's reasonable to kind of draw some parallels. And I won't go into detail, but I'll say there are various, like some Kagyu lamas, there's some texts that were translated into English, and also Rong Tongpa, who was a Sakya lama, from the Sakya tradition. They all took it as kind of, they emphasized that tantric aspect. And Rong Tongpa said you could take Tantra to mean the basis, the path, and the result, which is a standard presentation in Tibetan Buddhism, or in Buddhism in general. It's like the basis for something, then the path for transforming it, and then the result of that transformation. And he said, when he taught that, he said, well, the basis would be the continuum of your Buddha nature, right? Which in general, in Sutra is, we'll get into what it means, but in Tantra could also have the implication of the most subtle level of consciousness or of awareness, and the energy, that wind that accompanies that. If you take it that way, then the path could refer to the Vajrayana path, particularly to the experience of clear light, or clear light in the illusory body in Highest Yoga Tantra, which leads to the result, which are the three kayas of Buddha, you know, the state of union, they call it, Vajrayana. Anyway, so you could take it that way. Ram Trungpa says that's one way of taking the word Tantra here. Yeah, and then Khenso Rinpoche said this isn't really a teaching on Tantra, but the explanation is analogous to that. And you can think of it in terms of basis, path, and result. So that's reasonable, right? But it's not the main way that it's taught. And so so the way Gyaltsab Je teaches it is that to him Tantra is you could say it's the interesting point, that you have an awareness whose nature is clear and known, right? And the ultimate nature of that awareness is that it's empty of inherent existence. And that's the continuum. That's the, you know, so there's a continuum of that. And then it's interesting, what does it mean to be a continuum, right? What you could say is that you could see how a given moment of consciousness serves as a substantial cause for the next moment of consciousness. Does that make sense? Like, so in other words, your own awareness, right, arises in dependence upon your previous moment of awareness. And then, actually, I'll just share it. It's funny, when Khenso Rinpoche taught on this, he said, according to the teachings of the vehicle of individual liberation, a meditator who's in deep concentration can be aware of 65 such instances of awareness in a finger snap. Then he said, in certain Mahayana scriptures, right, it's great bodhisattvas who have realized emptiness and kind of have a deeper level of awareness. It said that in one finger snap, they can be aware of 365 instances of awareness. Can you imagine being that mindful? That's a question of what is mindful, you know, because Khenso Rinpoche was getting a point. He said, there comes a point where, what is an instant awareness? That's the continuum, right? And he's saying, it depends on the person, right? How much can you be aware of? That's an instant, right? So different bodhisattvas, different beings can be aware of different instants that are the continuum, right? And then for us, maybe it's quite a bit less than that. Maybe our awareness can't be aware of it 365th finger snap. And that's okay for now, right? We'll get there eventually if we achieve that level of meditative awareness. Because actually, think about mindfulness, though, right? Like, actually, I say that, like, if you first, I know people, I know I can think of this, right? Like, it's funny to me. If you first are learning mindfulness, right, to be aware of your own feelings, somebody might say, somebody could say, well, I've been angry for the last 15 years, but I didn't notice it. Now I just noticed. I was doing mindfulness. I suddenly realized, oh, I've been angry for years. That's something I've noticed. Sometimes we're not very aware of our own minds. That's my point, right? But the idea here is that you're cultivating an awareness of each instant of, you're currently in awareness of each instant of awareness, right? And then you start to notice that one arises from the next, or the one before it, and gives rise to the next. And that's a continuum of consciousness, right? And we'll get into this later, but and that continuum's ultimate nature is emptiness. And so you could say that's the sublime continuum. You, in brief, we're going to get into a lot more detail of what that means, but you have this sublime continuum of awareness, which is empty in its ultimate nature, which therefore can transform into a Buddha. And then Shastra, so treatise, we translate that. But actually, Shastra, they're different terms from different translators. But in brief, Shastra is actually made up of two syllables, right? So the first shas means like to correct something that's mistaken. And in this case, the Shastra, usually, by the way, in conventional usage in Buddhism, Shastras are considered to be treatises composed by great Indian masters, Buddhist masters. So they're not composed by we differentiate them. The sutras are the teachings of the Buddha, right? Their sutra means the teaching in which the Buddha was either directly speaking or was present and was the inspiration. Like for example, in the Heart Sutra, right, it says, through the power of the Buddha, the venerable Shariputra asked, so the Buddha was sitting there and kind of Shariputra asked a question and then Avalokiteshvara answers, but the Buddha is present and inspires that dialogue. So it's also a sutra. A Shastra is not composed by the Buddha. It's composed by one of the Indian masters. Although in this case, Shastra is, I don't know if Maitreya is Indian. He's technically abiding in Tushita. But I guess the point is that it's one of the early treatises that explain, because they differentiate in a way, in Tibetan Buddhism at least. There's a great respect. I guess actually that's the point here, is that there's a great respect for those early treatises that explain the meaning. And the Dalai Lama often talks about the great masters of Nalanda, right? The painting here of the 17 masters of Nalanda up there behind Maitreya, actually. So there's this emphasis on go back to the original sources. Don't just make up your own interpretation, if that makes sense. So that's what that's getting at. The Shastra is a treatise like that. So it corrects. What does it correct? Ultimately, it corrects our mental afflictions. So it's a treatise. It's a Shastra is a treatise that's designed to help us correct our own mind. And then tra in Shastra is the same as mantra. Tra is that tra. So mantra or Shastra. And Shastra means to protect. And here it can mean, or to save, to protect you. And in this context, it means to protect. It can mean to protect you from the lower realms by teaching you not to do evil actions, harm others and so on. It can mean to protect you from samsara by teaching you how to achieve liberation, or it can mean to protect you from samsara and individual nirvana by helping you achieve Buddhahood. So a Shastra is a treatise that corrects your understanding in order to eliminate your mental afflictions and thereby protects you and helps you achieve your goals, your spiritual goals. So wow, that's just the title, right? There's a lot of implication just from the title, aren't there, that one could meditate on. And do you have that sense that you could actually just meditate on the title? But wow. Is there time? Yeah, let's do one more thing. Okay, so then once you get past the title, our text says, right? Actually, so it says, I pay homage to all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and that's the translator's homage. So Tibetan translators would do an homage to the different homages depending on context, but here it's Mahayana, so Buddhism, Bodhisattvas, and it's a commentary on the sutras also. So anyway, it pays on. That's from the translator. That didn't come from Maitreya. And then we'll just do this, identifying the entities of the 7 Vajra points or 7 Vajra topics. So it says Buddha, Dharma, assembly, basic element, enlightenment, excellent qualities, and finally enlightened activities. So those are the 7 Vajra points or 7 Vajra topics. So I'm going to go over them, right? What are the 7? The Buddha jewel, the Dharma jewel, and the Sangha jewel. That's a set of 3. Then the basic element, which is a synonym for your continuum, for the Sublime Continuum. It's also a synonym for Buddha nature, or Buddha Tathagata Garbha. It's a synonym for all these things. Then enlightenment, right? So the enlightenment itself is the 5th Vajra point. The 6th is excellent qualities of enlightenment. And the 7th is excellent activities of enlightenment. So those are the 7 Vajra points, 7 Vajra points, topics. Now I want to show you, and I want to. So those are what they are. The whole text is going to be about this. Entire text is going to be about those 7 things. Does that make sense? So it's like it's introducing. These are the 7 points or topics of our treatise. And I want to start with this. So because I find this fun. Why are they called Vajra? And again, Vajra is sometimes a term that you may be familiar with from Tantra, right? We say the Vajrayana, the Vajra vehicle is Tantra. In this context, it's not that. That's not the implication here. But a Vajra sometimes in Sanskrit, it's a Sanskrit word, and sometimes in that context, it can refer to like the weapon of the god Indra. It can also refer to a diamond. So it's something that's like powerful, indestructible, diamond because it's the hardest substance, right? So it's like unbreakable. In this context, the term that's often used to explain this is difficult to penetrate. And so the implication here is that these 7 topics are difficult to penetrate. They're difficult to understand, which is interesting, isn't it? So like there was the author saying, you can tell this, you can see the connection now to Asanga's story for a second. I think, Asanga didn't, he persevered. And I actually want to read something now from Gyaltsabje, who's a disciple of Tsongkhapa, who wrote a commentary. He says, these 7 topics that are to be understood should be known to be Vajra-like, because they have a nature that is inexpressible in a perfect way. That is, since realizing them by means of language and conceptual thought is imperfect, and because they are what is to be known by means of individual discriminating wisdom of Arya beings, noble beings. Not only is this the ultimate truth, but also it is the wisdom that directly realizes it. Having been distinguished in terms of the ultimate truth, since all 7 Vajra-like topics are what are to be directly realized, they are inexpressible. So there are different points here I want to get at. They're, I think, beautiful, actually. One point is these 7 Vajra topics, right, are hard to penetrate. Why are they hard to penetrate? Because what's actually being gotten at is an inner meditative experience of someone who's directly realized emptiness, which is ultimately, which is not perfectly expressible, right? Because it's their experience. It's their experience of the ultimate truth in a meditative equipoise, right? So from that perspective, we could say it's hard, to really understand the meaning of these topics, which are getting at the ultimate nature of actually your ultimate nature, really, is hard to express, right, in words perfectly. So these topics are Vajra-like. But then Khenpo Rinpoche and Gyaltsabje later also says this. something quite beautiful. He says, but also Vajra topics means that these words are Vajra words. And he says, what does that mean? And he says something like this. He says, they were composed by someone who's had that experience. Maitreya and Asanga, they both had that experience. Asanga was said to be a third Bhumi Bodhisattva. So he'd had the experience of directly realizing emptiness. Maitreya is the 10th Bhumi Bodhisattva. He certainly had. So these terms or these words, that are getting at this experience, were composed by someone who's had the experience. And they're Vajra-like in the sense that their intention and their function is to lead us to that experience. So on the one hand, that kind of experience, direct experience of ultimate truth, from one perspective, it's impenetrable in the sense that you can't perfectly express it in words because it's beyond words. It's this experience of non-duality. But on the other side, this term Vajra-like is an expression of love and of compassion, actually. It's saying these are Vajra words in the sense there's somebody who's had an experience that can liberate you, that can enlighten you, an experience that's beyond words, and obviously not me, no, are putting that into words. And those words are Vajra-like in the sense that they will lead you to an experience that's beyond words. If you take them to heart, if you think about them, it says in the text, if you contemplate them deeply, if you internalize them, if you meditate on them, then these words will allow you to penetrate the impenetrable, in a sense, right? So in that sense, they're Vajra-like. Again, I think that's worth contemplating, isn't it? So, so they're, as we go through the text, you'll see it's presented in a certain way and Khenpo Rinpoche kind of joked when he taught it. He kind of said, so on the one hand, it won't be so easy to understand this text. He kind of joked like that. He kind of said, this isn't something easy, right? But then he was getting a point where he said, but it's not supposed to be easy, is it? Because it's actually, if you understand these words, which came from, and actually they also come from the Buddha, really, because the Uttaratantra is based on the sutras, actually. If you read like Asanga's commentary, he goes through a huge analysis of, and Gyaltsab is the same thing, of which sutras is this Shastra based on. And you can see all the points in this treatise by Maitreya can be found in sutras of the Buddha. Problem is, though, that if you read, actually, it's kind of funny, I sometimes think this, I'm sure. If you read the Sutra of the Buddha, you may think, I can't understand what he's getting at, really. It's quite difficult. So then Maitreya composed a commentary to explain it, make it easier, right? But I sort of laugh, but Maitreya composed that in Tushita Pure Land for beings like Asanga, right? So then Asanga thought, well, people won't be able to understand what Maitreya taught quite easily because, he spent 12 years in retreat and had a vision of Maitreya and went to Tushita, right? So he thought, let me write a commentary for these poor Nalanda monks who may not understand, right? Then you think of us. We're not, we're not Nalanda monks in the monastery in India, living among the greatest Buddhist scholars of all time. So then, Gyaltsab and some other Tibetans wrote commentaries, right? To explain what, so it's like, there was a sutra, Maitreya explained the sutra a little more simply, a little more sort of systematically. Asanga then explained that and elaborated and said, this is explaining this point in the sutra, and here's what Maitreya meant, in case you're missing it, right? And then Gyaltsab writes a much, much longer treatise saying, people sometimes misunderstand it this way. And by the way, if you misunderstand that way, here's why you're wrong. And you may misunderstand this way. And if you misunderstand that way, that's why you're wrong. That's what Gyaltsab does a lot of in his text, which is he's like going, oh, wow, people throughout history since the time of Asanga have misunderstood this text because even with Asanga's explanation, it's hard to understand, right? And then people wrote commentaries on Gyaltsab's text. And then when I'm trying to read Gyaltsab's text, I have actually at home, I have like 4 or 5 modern Tibetan Geshe's commentaries on that, and my notes from Khenpo Rinpoche, and my notes from Kirti Senja Rinpoche. So I'll use those to understand. And the point is, I'm joking, and it's also true, right? It's like, Khenpo Rinpoche said, it's not supposed to be easy to understand, but why? Because it's getting at an experience, right, of the ultimate nature of your own mind. Which, if you fully realize it, you'll become a Buddha. Right? And that's what this treatise is about. So the idea that it would be easy, it's that funny, isn't it? That kind of humorous, the idea that would be easy. But But what it's getting at, if you think of them as Vajra points in the sense of Vajra terms that came from Maitreya's experience, is that they're words and concepts that if we understand them and internalize them and contemplate them, can gradually lead us to that kind of experience. And eventually will lead us to enlightenment itself, is the idea. So it's quite beautiful, isn't it? That idea of Vajra. So now just this term, again, this is the kind of thing when I said this text, we won't do a lot of meditation at the beginning of the sessions, is like, that's a meditation, isn't it? So you just look at this word, Vajra, identifying the entities of the 7 Vajra points, right? So you go, oh, wow, that's the meaning of Vajra point. And if you're like, I guess my experience is, then I think, oh, wow, I want to study that text more. And so actually it's fun. I was thinking this at home, I have like, stack this big, I think, of just books on this text, different commentaries, because they're beautiful, right? It's like amazing, this text. And then you go meditate on it, right? Because it's amazing, and so I'll do my best. I'm sure I won't get it perfectly because they're difficult, but I'll base it on other people, all these traditional commentaries as best I can. And when I'm adding something, I'm going to try to say, like I did today, this is my own reflection, because I don't want to, in other words, I don't have Vajra words. I have ordinary words, but the words coming from Maitreya are Vajra. That makes sense, right? Because they come from the experience of somebody who has realized the ultimate nature of things as a 10th Bhumi Bodhisattva. John has a question, so I'll have to pause. Go ahead, John.
Yeah. This may be an oversimplification, because I try to do that so at least my mind can usually understand some of it. Is most of this text then really going to be about how can we approach starting the concept of understanding these 7 points?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. And the relationship.
That's what it sounded like. I just wasn't, since they're not necessarily mentioned in the title, but it sounded like that was the essence of what we were going to try to focus on, which is obviously a rather huge thing to get your mind around, so to speak.
But no, that's correct. Yeah. So those 7 topics the whole text is about those 7 topics and how they relate to each other.
Thank you.
Yep. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah. First of all, thank you very much for organizing the teachings. The idea of the continuum, I'm sure we'll get into this, but so the continuum of like consciousness now wrapped up in ignorance and confusion, but the continuum of the Uttaratantra, Buddha nature, that's also there. I mean, is that part of my continuum, or is that kind of a separate continuum? But I'm struggling.
Great question. And I'll say something. I mean, we'll get it. Of course, the text will go very deeply into that, but I'll share some general points about that to start with, because I think it's a good question that you're asking. And this what it says. This is what.
Can you repeat that question, Lauren?
Oh, sure. So I think I'll sort of say it, paraphrase it, I guess, which was, so that my own mind has ignorance and mental afflictions, and so is this Buddha nature a separate continuum? Does it exist right now in my mind? Is that a fair way to say it? Or is it something separate? Is it somewhere else, I guess, almost? Or is it something else than that? Is that kind of what you're...
Yes.
Yeah, so something like that. That's, I think, the question. And so, like I say, so first of all, we'll get into that in more detail as we go through the text, but I think it's a good question. So one point I'll make is this, is actually, so Tathagata Garbha, right, or which we the seed of one thus gone, let's say, or the seed of one gone, well gone. That's is a better way to say it. The seed of the Buddha nature, right? So it's like Buddha seed, and there are different translations, but this Buddha nature. Interestingly, Asanga and Gyaltsabje say, actually, technically, from a philosophical perspective, the Buddha, I don't need to look up the exact quote, but basically what they're saying is Buddha nature is is in the minds of one with mental afflictions. So in other words, in that sense, a Buddha doesn't have Buddha nature. Because Buddha nature is, you could say, is a potential that's not yet fulfilled. So when actually they say the Buddha, I mean, there's a continuum that continues, but it's no longer labeled Buddha nature. At the moment of enlightenment, your Buddha nature will no longer be labeled Buddha nature. It'll be labeled the Dharmakaya of Buddha at that point. So by its very definition, Buddha nature is in the minds of those with mental afflictions and ignorance. So you have Buddha nature now. This is the implication of that. And a point that Ken Sroshi made, which I often think back to and often think about in daily life, is even a bug has Buddha nature. So in other words, so for sure, you as a human being have Buddha nature, right? Like, and even and actually, there are debates about this, which we'll get into in terms of what different Lama, different Indian masters and Tibetan masters say. But in brief, from a Madhyamaka perspective, yeah, even the most evil beings have Buddha nature, right? Like, so even beings who are doing evil have Buddha nature. And so that's one point, is it's not somewhere else. And that, that even while we're in this throes of mental afflictions, our Buddha nature is there always. So it's a continuum that never is unbroken continuum. That, and they say this, that can never be stained. So in other words, even when somebody's in a state of, say, hatred, right? For example, that hatred, is present in their mind, obviously, but it doesn't stain their Buddha nature. So their Buddha nature is present at that time, and is an unbroken continuum, you could say, that's present in the mind of beings. Does that answer your question, or is there more to it? No.
Thank you. So, like, potential is always there.
Yeah, that's one way to say it. The potential, and that potential is there. And another way of saying it too is, one, there are different. We'll get into, like, there are two different types of Buddha nature. We'll explain them more later. But there's the naturally abiding Buddha nature, I'll call it. There's something called, the phrase usually is naturally abiding. The naturally abiding Buddha nature is an unbroken continuum that is beginningless. It goes back throughout beginningless time of one's samsara, and will no longer be called that only when one has become a fully enlightened Buddha, because it'll be called the Dharmakaya at that point. It'll become the Dharmakaya, but that, the referent, what is that referring to? Your naturally abiding Buddha nature is the ultimate nature, in other words, the emptiness of your awareness. And so one interesting thing to reflect on then is, because, so one is, emptiness can never be stained. That's one point, right? Can never be. Also, the emptiness of your mind is always present. And one of the things that I always said I'm going to differentiate. Now is my personal reflection. That is sometimes interesting to think about, is it's because our mind is empty of inherent existence, it can give rise to ignorance. It can give rise to hatred, but also it can give rise to love. Also, it can give rise to compassion, and also it can ultimately, it can become the consciousness of a hell being, and it could become the consciousness of a Buddha. And it's like, all that's possible because it's empty of some intrinsic nature. And so that's one meaning of Buddha nature, actually. And so in that sense, of course, not even when we're upset or something, that's possible because the mind is empty of intrinsic existence, which means it's also possible to become a Buddha. So it's interesting to think about. So even when you're upset, you could actually think, wow, upset. My mind, I wasn't upset in this way few hours ago. Now I'm upset in this way. If I could go from feeling, I don't know, something else then, and now like this, then my mind transforms. It's empty of being this intrinsically. It could become also the consciousness of a Buddha. It's kind of an interesting way to think, just to reflect. But so, yeah. Any other comments or questions?
So, so I got a little bit lost in the commentary part.
Yeah.
So is the Mahayana Uttaratantra, so is that what Maitreya gave to a Sangha and he wrote it down, or is that a Sangha's interpretation of the teachings that Maitreya gave?
No, yeah, so you got the right the first time. The Maitreya, so the Mahayana Uttaratantra Shastra is, Tibetans all consider that to have been composed by Maitreya, and that he taught it to Sangha. Sangha kind of wrote it down on Tibetan paper. I mean, I'm sorry, Indian pieces of paper or something. And then he wrote a commentary to it himself later. That's a separate commentary, but they consider the Uttaratantra Shastra itself to be a composition of Maitreya. And those 5 treatises of Maitreya, they consider all of those to have been composed by Maitreya. That's the way, yeah, the way Tibetans, but all traditional, like you could say, traditional Buddhist cultures consider it that way. Of course, I often find this like, yeah, I'm not to go into detail about, but I mean, sometimes it's the word like, I guess, actually, I'll say it this way. I find this is the best way to put this. Professor Bob Thurman, who's retired now as chair at Columbia University, he points out that like sometimes, say, what is called modern Western scholars will debate that, say, was it really composed by Maitreya and who composed? And he's one of them, scholar, and he said he kind of warned about the cultural arrogance of, sort of I don't know what the word is. Sometimes people, this is not just a comment about Western modern professor scholars. He says like sometimes he was sort of, as one of those scholars, he was saying sometimes modern scholars without a lot of evidence will start speculating on whether things are true. And he said that's kind of a result of imperialism, saying we know better than you, and there is rather than relying, like if Indian people say it was a certain source. So the Indian tradition, the Tibetan tradition, the Chinese tradition, all say that comes from Maitreya. Some modern Western scholars will debate that. But for sure, it's, yeah, the Tibetan tradition considers it from Maitreya. Oh, and Ryan has a question.
Hey, so I've been writing this down as everything because this might be garbled, but so like if Buddha nature is, it can't be stained, you said, and it's continuous, and so that has to mean that so it's uncaused, right? It's not subject to causes and conditions like other things, like other phenomena that are impermanent, right? And so I guess like in my head, like I've always thought about like creating, over time you create the right causes and conditions to where you can attain enlightenment. But if Buddha nature is uncaused, then that's not actually the way to look at it at all, right?
Good question. Yeah, first of all, did you ever hear that? He was asking, is Buddha nature uncaused? Is it an impermanent phenomenon or a permanent phenomenon? Because in Buddhism, things that arise due to causes and conditions are impermanent, and then there are uncaused phenomena that don't change instant by instant. So they're said to not be impermanent in the sense they're not changing instant by instant. And that's what you're getting at, right? Right.
Yeah.
So you're saying, is it permanent or impermanent? Is it a caused or uncaused phenomenon?
Yeah.
Question. Okay, maybe I'll go into that. So technically, there are a few points to make in reaction to that question. One is, there's actually the Uttaratantra, which we'll get into later more in detail, but it said there are 2 types of Buddha nature. There's the naturally abiding Buddha nature, which is as I mentioned just a minute ago, is the ultimate nature, is a term referring to the ultimate nature of mind itself. And then there's what's called, sometimes translated as the developing Buddha nature, which actually is kind of, you could say, are the good qualities that one currently has, which can be increased. Like, so one's current love, one's current patience, one's current compassion, one's current wisdom, and so on, which can be increased over time. So a few points then. One is the developing Buddha nature is arises due to causes and conditions, does change instant by instant, so is an impermanent phenomena. But the naturally abiding Buddha nature is an emptiness. So it's a non-affirming negation, like space. It's like space in that sense. So it's that's uncaused. And a metaphor or a way of again, we'll get into much more philosophical detail on this later, but one way of saying it, one way of beginning to understand it is like this. Say it this way, like for something, for physical, I'm going to use a metaphor for a second. For a physical object to arise, like a house, there has to be space, right, in which that house can arise. If there were no space, there could be nothing could be built, nothing could be constructed in a certain, you couldn't even say, right, nothing could be constructed if there weren't a space in which it could be constructed. So in that sense, and Ryan, you're getting it. This is, I think, is a deeper reflection on your question. So I'm going to go to those two. The developing Buddha nature is a cause phenomena, right? And you can create the causes by, for example, you have a little bit of compassion and you cultivate more compassion, your compassion will increase, right? And you can see that comes about through various causes and conditions, such as practice. So that's developing Buddha nature. Then the naturally abiding Buddha nature is an emptiness. Nothing causes emptiness, right? Because it's an absence of intrinsic existence, right? So it's uncaused, and at the same time, enlightenment couldn't arise without it.
Can I ask you, and not to jump in, but so could I think of developing Buddha nature as kind of an antidote to the obscurations of karma that kind of block your inherent Buddha nature? Like, would I develop, for instance, developing compassion and developing virtuous attributes, those things serve to hopefully remove some of the clouds of samsaric thinking in your mind, revealing what's already been there. I guess it's kind of the way I'm thinking of it.
It does seem to work that way, and yet I want to differentiate something for a second, because I think it's important, is that I mentioned at the very beginning, right, that Buddhahood fulfills one's own purposes and also the purposes of others, right? Like that bodhicitta is a wish to fulfill my own purposes and the welfare of others, and then Buddhahood is a state in which one's own purposes have already been fulfilled, and one is most capable of fulfilling the welfare of others. One is most skillful, one is most able to fulfill the welfare of others. I'm getting why I'm saying that in relation to your question, right? Is that so meditating, for example, on the naturally abiding Buddha nature, the emptiness of the mind, purifies the mind of the mental afflictions ultimately, and eventually can get rid of even the most subtle obscurations. And it serves as the cause of the svabhavakaya, so the nature body of the Buddha, which is the emptiness of the Buddha's mind. On the other hand, the developing Buddha nature, right? So one's actions of generosity, of patience, of ethics, and so on, they also serve, this is to kind of clarify a point you were making, I think. they also serve as causes for later developing the form bodies of the Buddha, which can go out into the world and benefit others, right? So those have to have a cause, and part of the cause of that is the 6 perfections, right? Practicing particularly those first 3, and then you can include joyous effort, giving, ethics, patience, and joyous effort is included. Joyous effort helps with both, but so for example, so like the karma created by a bodhisattva who's practicing giving, eventually serves as a cause for their developing a body of a Buddha and also a pure land of a Buddha in which they help others, for example. So my point is that those actions aren't only to purify, they're also to create positive causes to lead to certain results for the welfare of other beings.
Thank you.
And I know we just have a minute left, so maybe I'll say another comment, and then we'll stop. So yeah, I wanted to at least introduce the 7 Vajra points today. So I'm glad we got to do that. And what we'll get to, I just want to kind of transition for next time. First of all, if you want to read a little further, you can just read a few more verses in the text that can help you to kind of, you will, even if you don't understand them, it's kind of leaving an imprint to kind of go, okay, what does this mean? Or what's that getting at? And that's good. So leaving an imprint of kind of being familiar with the terms and kind of having some curiosity. And what we're going to start to get into next time, it mentions the sources. It mentions one, the king of Dharani Svara Sutra. There are many sources. I can list the sutras. I don't think that's going to help people a lot because I don't think you're going to go read all the sutras necessarily. But I can mention what the sources are, but we're not going to emphasize that too much. What I want to emphasize next time is where it says determining the order. Asanga and Gyaltsabje make some very interesting points about the relationship between these 7 Vajra topics, how they relate from your own experience. And that starts to get into really interesting things about refuge. And I want to say, like, whether you, if you practice, actually I'll just share it. Buddhist practitioners take refuge every day. So like I take refuge every day, it's practice I do. And my experience for me is that understanding something at least about these 7 Vajra topics, for me, makes the practice of refuge much more profound and interesting. And I often thought that early on, like Khenpo Rinpoche used to say, there were like stories of like Kadampa lamas from the, Atisha, like students of Atisha, who would they were quite advanced yogis, and they would go meditate on refuge. And I was like, wow, what are they meditating on? Because it's obviously not just going, I go for refuge of the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha, I go for it. They're not just saying those words. What are they actually thinking about that? What would that mean? And it's in this text that kind of explains some of that. What would you, where refuge is still a practice, we're quite in advanced, like bodhisattvas on bhumis would still be taking refuge. What does that mean? And there are different types of refuge and different ways refuge interacts with your Buddha nature to do certain things, to bring certain things about. And so next time I want to explore some of that, and then the whole text then will be exploring these. There'll be a quick overview of what is the Buddha, what is the Dharma, what is the Sangha, what's the element, what's enlightenment, so we'll go through those, and then it'll go very deeply. And so this chapter will go very deeply into also what is the element or the Buddha nature. That's going to be the main topic, but you can't really, part of it is if it's Buddha in nature, if it's a nature that can become a Buddha, you have to understand what's a Buddha, right? So it's going to explore that too. And then Buddhas give rise to the Dharma, and Dharma gives rise to the Sangha. So you can see how you start to get a sense of that. So next time we're going to explore the relationship between these 7 Vajra topics a bit to understand how that would impact us for our own practice of taking refuge. So we could do our dedication. Yeah. The supreme jewel bodhicitta, where it has not arisen, may it arise and grow. Where it has arisen, may it not decrease, but increase more and more. In the snowy mountain paradise, you the source of good and happiness, all-powerful Chinrezig Tenzin Gyatso, please remain until samsara ends. I dedicate all these merits, which are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side. So the I, which is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side, may achieve Buddha's enlightenment, which is merely labeled, totally empty from its own side. To lead all sentient beings who are merely labeled, totally empty from their own side, to the state of enlightenment as quickly as possible. In particular, through studying this Uttaratantra, may we all be able to realize our Buddha, realize our Buddha nature and actualize enlightenment with its vast qualities and vast activities for the welfare of ourselves and all sentient beings. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Lord.
Thanks.
Thank
No, thank you.
Thank you.